This is a public service announcement brought to you by Hindsight. Relax, rest your eyes, and listen to the words of Pastor Chuck.
In reality, God doesn't change. Behold, I am the Lord God, I change not. But from our side, so many times there seems to be an apparent change. Now, he goes on to contrast now the living true God, the creator of the universe, with the gods of the heathen. The idols of the heathen are silver and gold. They are the work of man's hands. In other words, there are man-created gods. Now, they're trying to say today, many people, some of these, and you'll hear it, they'll say, well, God is the invention of man. The idea of God was created by man because man needed to believe in something, and so he made up God, and so God is sort of a creation of man. What a ridiculous thing. But you see, that's a part of this whole humanism that makes man, the world revolves around man. Man is the top of all things. And this elevating of man, humanism, would make God then the invention or the creation of man rather than man being created by God. And what a turnaround. Well, I created God, absurdium e ridiculum, it's just. But it is acknowledged that men did make idols, and they did worship these idols. The idols were representative to them of their gods. Now, ancient man lived closer to the truth than we live. We have created so many facades upon facade upon facade that, man, it's hard to find the real person. You have to dig through one facade after another to get down to the real person. They live closer to nature, closer to earth, closer to reality, closer to truth. We hide the truth so many times behind the facades. They marveled at the reproductive capacity of man, the power to create new life. And thus they began to worship the reproductive organs of the body. And they made idols to represent these things. And they would worship that because, after all, the mystery of the origin of life, a new child, it was marvelous. It was mysterious. How does it happen? We know it does. But it was one of those things that was sort of shrouded in mystery to them. But it was godlike, the capacity to create, and so they worshipped it. They had the female sex goddess, Asherim, which was to the Greeks, Aphrodite, which was to the Romans, Venus, and all of the statues that went with it. Statues of Venus, the statues of Aphrodite, the statues of Ashtoreth, the female goddess of sex. And all of these idols represented their objects of worship. Now, in our world today, we have many people who worship sex. It's their god or goddess. But you see, they don't carve out little idols anymore. Oh, they have pictures maybe in magazines that would be an equivalent in a sense to the idols. But if you look at a person's life, their whole life revolves around sex, sexual encounters, the excitement and sensuality, and that's their whole life. That's what their life revolves around. That's really what they live for. That's what they talk about. That's just that's just what they're after. And it is really the God that controls their life. Their life is controlled by this. Now, we're too sophisticated to make an idol today, but nonetheless, it's still the God. In those days, they enjoyed pleasure also, and so they had their god of pleasure, Molech. And the little idols of Molech actually represented the fact that they lived for pleasure. Their whole life was geared around the pleasure principle. And there are people today whose lives are all centered around pleasure. You know, the hedonists, the philosophies that said that pleasure was the chief good. And there are people today that buy into that. And pleasure is the chief good. And their whole life, they only work in order that they might get off on the weekend. So they can take off with their hang gliders and ATCs and everything. Pleasure, man. Thrill, excitement. Woo! I love it. It is that rush, that thrill and all of these things, and they live for that. It's that's getting on the curl of that wave and ooh, feeling as you're going down, and oh man, free ride on nature, just great, good rush, good thrill, and they live for that. That's their life. Now they don't have little idols that they say, well, and where they put their candles and they offer their prayers and all to this little god of pleasure, But nonetheless, they still worship pleasure. It is their God. There were those in those days who worshiped power. I want to have, I want to possess, I want to rule. And thus they had their little god of mammon that represented their chief goal of life was to possess and to control and to rule. There were those who worshiped the intellect. They said the most important thing in life is to know. And they were constantly studying, constantly reading, constantly trying to gain as much insight and knowledge as they possibly could. And they had their little idol that they carved, and they said, this is the God of knowledge. And they worshiped knowledge, their desire to know. And so the gods of the idols of the heathen are made of silver and gold, but they are the works of men's hands. Men have made these gods themselves. Our God made us. When they made them, they put mouths on them. But the psalmist Riley observes, they can't talk. They carved out a little mouth on that little idol, but it can't talk. They have eyes, but they can't see. They have ears, but they can't hear. And neither is there any breath in their mouths. In other words, when man makes a god, he makes it like himself. If a man does not worship the true and the living God, then he does worship a projection of himself. Self-worship. If I were God, this is what I would do. This is how I would be. This is what I feel is the most important thing in life. And so this is what I worship. This is the thing that rules me. This is the ideal that governs me. This is my master passion. And it's a projection of me. It's sort of like me. And so when a man makes a god, he makes it like himself. Because I have eyes, I carve eyes on my little god. Because I have ears, I carve ears. Because I have a mouth, I carve a mouth. But when a man makes a god, he makes it like himself, but he makes it less than himself. Because though I carve the ears, the little god still can't hear. Though I carve the eyes, the little god still can't see. Though I carve the mouth, the little god can't talk. So I have made it like me, but in reality, I have made it less than me. But verse 18 is the killer. They that make them are like unto them, and so is everyone that trusts in them. The truth of life, inescapable truth of life, is that you become like your God. If your God can't see, you're becoming blind to the truth yourself. If your God can't hear, you're becoming deaf to the voice of God in nature. If your God is insensate, you are becoming insensate. If your God is false, you are becoming false, for a man becomes like his God. Now, remember, when you made your God like yourself, but you made it less than yourself. Thus, if you are becoming like your God, you're on the road down. If your God is a false God, becoming like your God, you're degrading. And so I want you to observe all of those who have rejected the true and the living God and watch their lives. Their lives are in the process of being degraded. Sin is degrading. And to worship pleasure is degrading. To worship money is degrading. Now, on the other hand, if a man becomes like his God, if you're worshiping the true and the living God and you're becoming like your God, think of how wonderful that is. And the scripture affirms that that is true. Beloved, now are we the sons of God. It doesn't yet appear what we're going to be, but we know when he appears, we're going to be like him. Why? Because I'm becoming like my God. Paul said, and we with unveiled faces as we behold the glory of the Lord are being changed from glory into the same image by the power of his Spirit within us. That's why it's so important that you worship the true and the living God, because that is always an uplifting. You're becoming better as you worship the true and the living God. If you're worshiping a false God, you're going down. You're being degraded. I've observed something else that I think is rather interesting. For those who have established the intellect as their God, to know, to understand is the most important thing in the world. And thus I spend my hours in study, poring over volumes that I might expand my understanding of the world around me. Well, tell me, friend, what about the eternal God, the one who created the universe? The ultimate knowledge would be the knowledge of that eternal God. Tell me about him. I'm an agnostic. And they make it sound like they came right out of class in Harvard. They give it sort of a nasal kind of a Harvard tone so that it really sounds sophisticated. I'm an agnostic. Oh, interesting. Do you know what agnostic means? Yes, not to know. Comes from the Greek. Gnosko is to know. Put an A in Greek as a negative prefix. sort of like our non in English, a negative prefix. A is a negative prefix in Greek. So you have theos, God. You have atheos, no God. You have gnosko, to know in Greek. You have agnosko, from which we get agnostic, and that's not to know. You know what the Latin word is for not to know? Ignoramus. And so here's a guy who says, well, I believe that to know is the most important thing, and I spend my life studying, poring over the volumes. Oh, tell me about ultimate knowledge. Oh, I'm an ignoramus. And in reality, that's what they're telling you. Isn't that fascinating? You make knowledge your God. You worship it, and you end up with a confession of ignorance. The person that worships power ends up a slave. There is a very wealthy man who befriended me. He invited me out to lunch. The interesting thing, though, this fellow has never had to really work a day in his life. But so often I get stuck with the bill. He's very clever at that. Because he has a hard time spending his money. He has a hard time letting it go. And I've met people that, just have become a slave to their money. Yet, that's what they worship. They worship it so much they can't let it go. And thus, rather than really enjoying it and using it, they just seek to amass more and more, and they're never satisfied. So you make power your God, and you become a slave. You make intellect your God, and you become an ignoramus. You make pleasure your God, and you become filled with lust. And you begin to have an unfulfilled desire. Or worse than that, an unfulfillable desire. The desire is still there, but you can't fulfill it. And so you go around in a continual lust, never satisfied, always seeking more. And yet you've made fulfillment, that thrill, that moment, a thrill as your God, and now you become satiated, jaded, tragic. They that worship them have become like them, so is everyone that trusts in them. Oh, bless the Lord, O house of Israel. Bless the Lord, O house of Aaron. Bless the Lord, O house of Levi. And ye that fear the Lord, bless the Lord. How wonderful it is to worship and serve the true and the living God, to be coming like him, a God of love. I'm becoming loving. A God of purity, I'm becoming pure. A God of holiness, I'm becoming holy. God of righteousness, I'm becoming righteous. God of peace, I'm filled with peace. Blessed be the Lord out of Zion, which dwells at Jerusalem. Praise ye the Lord.
You have been listening to Pastor Chuck. This public service announcement has been brought to you by Hindsight. If you found it helpful, please like, subscribe, and comment if you wish. We at Hindsight says, thank you for your time.